109 years since the ANC's formation, is there much to celebrate? In its over 25 years in power, the party has been marred by corruption, something that President Cyril Ramaphosa acknowledges has weakened the ANC. Lack of service delivery and the high unemployment rate have also ravaged the country. In his January 8th statement last night, Ramaphosa promised that these and other issues will be addressed this year. To speak on these and more, our anchor Thulasizwe Simelane joins us now in conversation with the President. Of course, he is at Luthuli House, sitting there with the President waiting for us. Let's take you there live.
Good morning, Masiho. We are live from Luthuli House, the headquarters of the African National Congress, an organization that is marking its 109th anniversary since it was founded in 1912 and delivering the traditional January 8th statement, which is really about charting the way forward. And I'm pleased to be joined by President Cyril Ramaphosa. He joins me in his capacity as President of the ANC, but of course, he's also the President of the Republic, and questions to do with the running of the Republic will be posed to President Ramaphosa. Let's get straight into it then, Mr. President, because we don't have much time. Let's start. I like how you, in your NEC statement of January 8, listed your areas of priority, the 4 priorities. The order looks right, Mr. President. You put the issue of defeating the coronavirus right at the top as priority number 1. I will be arguing later on that, you don't always follow this order, and that at some point palace politics of the ANC overtake you. But let's start with the coronavirus. What does defeating the coronavirus look like at the point at which we are in the second wave with many, many thousands of people testing positive daily and the restrictions we have seemingly not really achieving that effect and many, many people dying every day?
Well, defeating the coronavirus pandemic basically has one goal in mind: to bring coronavirus infections to an end. But it's an aspirational one, and it's a goal that we are focused on, and that is why we put it of the 4 priorities as number 1. And everybody in our country is engaged in this struggle against coronavirus. There's not a single person I can name in our country who is not aligned with us as government and as the people of South Africa against this one common enemy. What it also involves is that we must lessen the infections, we must lessen the deaths, and actually ensure that nobody should continuing to die from COVID-19. And we've got an arsenal of tools and weapons, and some we have spoken about repeatedly: safe distancing, as well as social distancing rather, as well as washing hands, masking, and just taking care of one another. The other important one that has now come to the fore more sharply is the vaccine. The acquisition of the vaccine is critical, and we have now succeeded in getting 1 million doses, which will be available this month, 500,000 from the Serum Institute in India in the next month, and thereafter it's going to be full access, a lot of access from many others. And of course, the second issue that comes to the fore is the distribution of this mass, or the implementation rather, of this mass vaccine process that we are going to get involved in. It will also involve distribution, and it will also involve administering. That's important. But the other third one is the funding. We've got to amass the necessary resources to fund the acquisition of these vaccines, because they don't come cheap.
How will we fund it, Mr. President? Because you'll remember there was that debate at the point at which South Africa was supposed to have paid a deposit to COVAX, and that didn't make it on time. Eventually, we ended up paying via the Solidarity Fund, which some said, is an indictment on us, that we've basically had to rely on this fund set up, which is not a bad thing, by the way, that we have this fund of patriotic South Africans contributing. But the fact that the state of our public finances was such that we simply could not fund it from our public finances, an indictment on us and your government.
Well, I wouldn't call it an indictment. Let's start with just paying the deposit. paying the deposit is just, if you like, a logistical matter. There's nothing punitive that has been leveled against us. We were one of the originators of that COVAX facility, and countries are meant to pay a deposit, which we have done, bar the logistical issues, and it's been blown out of a lot of proportion. The Solidarity Fund is our national fund. The government was the first to make a contribution to the Solidarity Fund. So who owns the Solidarity Fund? The people of South Africa. We contributed as government, business has contributed, families have contributed, churches, even political parties and individuals. So it's not an indictment against us to rely on the Solidarity Fund. It is our fund which we've now made available for all the things that we have to pay. And we have to raise the further funding. So money is never going to be a problem when it comes to the acquisition of the vaccine.
Have you been tailoring your timelines to respond to the public outcry around the vaccination program, in that your initial message was purely on COVAX, saying that we can expect the first doses to be administered in the second quarter of the year, and a few days later, when the outcry was there, we started hearing about, well, we are in negotiations with directly with suppliers, and a few days later we then had this announcement about the Serum Institute and the 1.5 million doses that will be delivered. Have you been tailoring it to respond to the outcry that says you had no plan?
No, we've always had a plan. And in the end, the vaccine issue, like the virus, is a moving process, if you like, a moving target. And we've got to use every way in which we can make sure that we get the vaccine. The COVAX facility, yes, will only be available in the second quarter. And many countries are waiting for that. And even those countries that paid, huge amounts as deposit to various producers are still waiting. Yeah. Some have been lucky enough to get the vaccines earlier. Some are still waiting. I spoke, as I was saying earlier, to the Prime Minister of Canada, and he said they paid way in advance. They paid even 4 times what they need, but they are still waiting for the various other batches that will come. So we've had to use a multi-pronged approach, and government has not been sitting on its laurels. We've had to use the COVAX facility, which can only make available a certain portion, not all what we need. We've also utilized the AVAT process on the continent, a task team that I set up as the chair of the union, and we're also involved in bilateral talks with a variety of producers of this vaccine. And the fourth one is we've been in contact with various heads of states to make sure that South Africans and indeed the continent get the best vaccines.
Lastly, on this issue, Mr. President, I would like you to give me your best words to describe what happened around the response to COVID-19 in as far as the corruption is concerned, right? With the result that we sit here now, as you are talking about vaccination, people, genuinely and reasonable people are saying, we hope there's not going to be corruption in the rollout of the vaccine. We hope we're not going to hear stories of a middleman and some entity that's politically linked playing a role in the supply chain and the logistics that will be involved. I think you'll understand that comes from the very real lived experience, that there was something really diabolical about people taking advantage of a pandemic that's killing people, and largely people associated with your party, the ANC, to loot.
Well, let me say, without trying to shield our own position, the personal protective equipment issue has not only been a problem that is unique to South Africa. They've had the same problem in many other countries where corruption and fraud has been the order of the day, even in your more developed economies. I mean, I was reading a report the other day that even in Britain, they also had fraud, corruption.
Comfort, though, Mr. President. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves.
No. I'm just saying that
yeah.
we've had such a problem all over the world. But, of course, as South Africans, we look at our own situation and we are concerned. I raised this issue early on and said I am concerned about corruption. And in the end, I even instituted an investigation, and the various entities are in the process of doing that. So it was concerning. But we have immediately taken steps to address the issue of corruption around PPEs. But what we are also saying is that we don't want to see the same process ensuing around the vaccines. So we have learned, and therefore we have learned a lot of lessons, and we are going to make sure that the distribution of vaccines is flawless and it is done according to the regulations that we have. We are facing this challenge and we will overcome it.
Mr. President, let's talk about the situation around our economy. You introduced the South Africa Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan with the target that you will be creating 800,000 work opportunities, and that's your second priority as the ANC within the January 8 statement. Since you made that announcement of the South African Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, what are the tangibles that you can point to that have started happening?
Well, quite a number of processes are underway. We spoke about how we need to make sure that we implement, particularly the reforms. The reforms are being implemented. They are currently underway. The one major issue that we said we want our economy to focus on is infrastructure. Infrastructure rollout has started and it is going to be ongoing. The creation of of jobs through the public sector is also underway. People are being hired. People are being brought into employed positions. So all that is happening. And we held our third investment conference last year in December, and that too went relatively well. And we are going to continue seeing investors coming in because they see that South Africa is a good destination for investment despite all the problems that we continue to experience. So we are on a good path of ensuring that there is economic recovery.
But, Mr. President, the state-owned entities are a mess. They are a serious mess, and you've been in this position, elected since 2019, but also elected in Parliament without having gone to a general election since 2018.
Yes.
Why should South Africans continue to give you a longer leash around state-owned entities when we see what we see at SAA, where workers have not been paid for a good 7 months or more, where we see what we see at Denel, and we're seeing what we're seeing at the SABC? What do you have to account for that failure to turn around the SOEs?
Well, firstly, our state-owned enterprises were docked by state capture, a lot of corruption, and we are rolling that back. The money that was either overpaid or paid without due cause is being returned, is being recovered, and that is important because it had never happened in South African history that the money that had been paid is now being recovered. Eskom is recovering quite a lot of money. SAA is the case in point. SAA was on the brink of collapse, and what we are seeking to do is to reposition SAA. But it so happens at a very bad time of lack of travel and lack of revenue, and so therefore it gives rise to even more challenges. But we are committed to restructuring and reforming our state-owned enterprises. We're not going to turn back from there.
But what do you say to workers such as the SAA workers, for example, who have not been paid for all these months? Well, to say, as you say, that you are committed to turning around state-owned enterprises, I can open many, many speeches that you have delivered, Mr. President, that have that exact sentence. But it's cold comfort for them who are not receiving their salaries, who face a bleak future.
Yeah, SAA is a particular problem because it ran out of money. And money, therefore, has to be found. The fiscus has come forward to say we are going to provide money, and that is something that we are going to do. And therefore, SAA needs to be looked at slightly differently, as should Dinel, because Dinel also ran into its own challenges. But on the whole, we are on the path of reforming our state-owned enterprises. The State-Owned Enterprise Council that convened last year is going to be meeting repeatedly to look at every state-owned enterprise to see the extent to which they can be repositioned so that they should serve the developmental mandate and process that they need to. So all that will be done, and the important thing is that we have turned them back from the capture, and I think that does need to be recognized, and we are repositioning.
Reducing the public sector wage bill is a particular issue that you are seized with, and as far as reforming the public finances, Mr. President, as you know, our situation with the fiscal deficit as well as, what we face in as far as public finances are concerned. But in that process, there was this extraordinary situation where government did not honor an agreement government entered into some 3 years ago. And some will be saying, if we can't trust this government to keep its word to its own employees, how can anyone trust the word of this government? How can, bondholders trust you as a government? It was extraordinary, wasn't it?
Well, the issue of the wage bill is something that is still under discussion with the labor unions, and we are committed to finding a solution. The real fact of the matter is that we are running a huge deficit, almost 16% deficit to our GDP, which is a huge amount. And the debt level of the country has gone up in a way that you cannot even begin to imagine. So we are having to deal with the requirement of the wage bill against a government, a fiscus, that has run into serious problems. And that's precisely what we are discussing. But what compounds the issue even further is that COVID descended on us. And we've had to spend quite a lot of money to reprioritize even. So we are dealing with real issues. Yeah. It's not fictional issues, real issues that affect the livelihoods of all South Africans.
But do you consider that to be an adequate explanation for why there was no prior planning when you agreed to this wage agreement 3 years ago as a government? What was the thinking? How were you going to fund it? What do you say to the workers that have not received an increase? Many of whom, by the way, sorry, Mr. President, are healthcare workers, police officers that you have expected to be at the front lines in response to the COVID-19.
What we can be found fault for is that we did not foresee the pandemic. And no one around the world foresaw it. There are those who look through the looking glass and say, maybe you should have foreseen that it will happen, but we never really foresaw it happening in the way that it has. And so therefore resources have had to be channeled towards COVID-19. But at the same time, we did not really foresee that our revenue collection through the South African Revenue Service would go down in the way that it has, 300 billion deficit in terms of revenue collection. So all those things have combined to present us with a perfect storm. And now we are in the middle of that storm, and it is for that reason that we are engaging in discussions. And of course, as a worker, you will never understand why what you were promised is not being paid. The simple fact is that there's just no money.
Yeah. I could take up the conversation forward, Mr. President, about the change of the argument being around the legality of the agreement, but that would be going too much into the nitty-gritty of this particular issue with limited time. So let me move on. I want to touch finally on the theme of leadership in our current context, particularly your executive. I'd suggest to you, Mr. President, you have problems in that executive. You have ministers who sometimes just don't get it. The situation, if I can go through one or two of them. Let's start with what happened recently with Minister Lindiwe Sisulu in Cape Town, where an activist was asking her about promises she made about houses in another area, and she completely lost her temper with that particular activist. Now, it may seem like an incident where you can argue who provoked whom, etc. But in that, I don't know if you saw the video, is revealed, this is what I'm arguing, an attitude of a minister who doesn't believe that she should be accounting to the citizen. And I'm putting that as an example that talks to some of the issues you as the ANC have been diagnosing and saying that the distance between the led and the leaders is widening. And when you see a minister like that doing what happened with Minister Sisulu, it sort of says, there you have it, the ANC and its leaders refusing to account to the people. Simple question. I hope you're not going to break the promises like you did in Empolweni.
Well, the issue of accountability is an important matter because all of us as members of the executive have to live up to the oath that we took to account to the people of South Africa. We are just servants of the people, and we need to live up to that. And the incident that you referred to was an unfortunate incident, but I do have good members of the executive who are really committed to doing their work. Even Minister Sisulu, the one you referred to, she really works hard. And she's committed to her work and serving the interests, and does so from a compassionate point of view. So the executive is doing the best, and we are serving the people of South Africa.
But what about those...
Hold on, let me finish.
Yes.
We are serving the people of South Africa under very trying and difficult circumstances. Not that that should be seen as an excuse, but that is the reality, and we're trying to do the best that we can. And sometimes, as I've said publicly, yes, mistakes are made, but we need to look at whether the demeanor that we have is that of being compassionate and wanting to serve the people.
How do you account to South Africans for members of your executive and members of the ANC who are quote-unquote capped politicians? I mean, some of the revelations we've seen, Mr. President, where, you know, people have been having their incomes supplemented, you know, by entities and business individuals, some of whom are doing business with government. We can count the likes of Nomvula Mokonyane, Jeff Makubo, Zizi Godwa, your Deputy Minister, Pinky Kekana mentioned in the Thulasizwe. When you ask your comrades, what's happening? What do they tell you? What's this culture of politicians and members of the executive having their income supplemented over and above what the taxpayer pays them?
Well, all those matters obviously have to be dealt with individually. We need to look at how they have happened, and some of them have to do with either individual and personal relationships. So, and I want to examine each on its own merits. In the end, obviously we need to live up to an ethical code, a code that dictates that we've got to serve the people, we've got to be honest and have integrity. And all that, a combination of all that, is what should really underpin everything that we do. So dealing with individual cases, you'll find that, yes, there will be some explanations. Sometimes there will be lapses. And these are matters that we have to continue dealing with.
Why should South Africans understand that these are lapses and mistakes, and not demand to see you take action against some of these executive members?
Well, action is a matter that obviously that you take once you have examined every situation, once you have looked at it closely and determining it on its own merits. What I can say is that we are aware of what our responsibilities are. We are also aware that people of South Africa expect much more from us as their leaders and as their servants.
Yeah.
And we will continue seeking ways of living up to that. And I'm heartened by the fact that We have ourselves admitted our own weaknesses, our own mistakes, and we've done a diagnosis, and we will keep on doing that.
But that's the thing, though, Mr. President. You as the ANC and ANC leaders are good at diagnosing issues. It's the fix that just never seems to come.
Well, the fix is the process that is now going to start unfolding as we move on. So, and I think we are all very impatient. We are all very eager to see things moving and shaking. The fact of the matter is that some of these things take time, and they will happen because we've got to do good by the people of South Africa.
Lastly, Mr. President, the issue of the ANC. In your January 8th statement, you recall the values on which the ANC was founded. And you say integrity, honesty, tolerance, respect, and above all, service. I imagine that many people must have chuckled at hearing you say that, particularly the issue around integrity, when the very structure in the ANC that carries the name Integrity Commission, doesn't seem to enjoy any respect among the leadership of the ANC, including from the highest office inside the ANC by the Secretary General of the ANC himself. I mean, when he says that I will never step down, I will never step aside, until I'm told by branches of the ANC, what message does it send to that member of the ANC, former MEC in Mpumalanga, who is accused of rape?
Well, the good thing about the African National Congress is that we are not afraid to admit our own weaknesses and our own faults. In many ways, we do tend to bare our chests and our souls. And that in itself is a process that is going to lead us to, if you like, redemption, lead us to being better positioned to serve the interests of the people of South Africa. We now have a very good base, a good foundation, but an integrity commission that I have said needs to be strengthened. It needs to act independently, and it also needs to act without favor, even towards a president or any high-positioned person or highly positioned person in the ANC. And these are the pains and the pangs that we have to go through. And we will reposition the African National Congress. We will position it in a way that its image should be seen by the people of our country.
What does that repositioning look like, in being realistic, Mr. President? Because let me suggest to you, from where I sit, it looks like you have two ANCs, and they can't coexist for long. Right now, it's an unhappy marriage. I mean, the rest of us as society sitting outside and watching it, we are watching this slow, painful, almost inevitable situation that something has got to give. And I could give you the contours of who falls on which side, and I think you know very well. You see it when there are court cases, for example, of the ANC Secretary General. That's where you see the expression. You come under fire, and they talk about people who are traitors. They may not call you by name, Mr. President, but I think you and I know when they say that traitors have taken charge of the ANC. They're talking about you and your leadership.
Well, we have only one ANC, and our people have only one ANC. And it is the ANC that has always served the interests of the people of our country for 109 years. And it is this ANC which the 54th conference gave a clear mandate to the leadership that go out and unite the ANC, this one ANC, to renew this ANC and position it in a way that it should serve the interests of all South Africans. We are a political organization, and we come from various different, not only areas, but ways of doing things and thought, and we have to mesh all this together so that the ANC, founded and based on the values that the founding fathers and the mothers of the ANC had envisaged. And we will continue to do precisely that. Sometimes there will be reversals, sometimes there will be detours, but the path going forward is to have an ANC that's based on integrity and based on the service of our people. And as a political organization, yes, sometimes we struggle to find that happy medium that should be acceptable to our people. But admitting some of these things, as far as I'm concerned, is an important start, and the implementation process will now ensue. And sometimes we'll get it right, and sometimes we will not get it right. But we are determined to move forward to ensure that the ANC is the ANC that our people want to see.
Lastly, when you emphasize the issue of this resolution around strengthening the Integrity Commission and the response to corruption and people stepping aside, people such as Carl Niehaus, people such as Kebi Mapadzwe, Tony Yengeni, and the likes are quick to point to you to say, well, you seem to be picking and choosing which of the ANC conference resolutions should be prioritized because these ones serve your interests, but the radical economic transformation resolutions you are not implementing. They say there is no state bank. Land expropriation without compensation, you are seeking to tone it down and say we're just seeking to clarify the circumstances under which it can happen. You postponed indefinitely the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, which are things that you were instructed to do in 2017, and you have not done. Why should you not be worried about your position?
Well, I'm not concerned about my position. I serve at the behest of the members of the ANC. And should members of the ANC say no, one, you're not serving us well, you must move out. Gladly so, because I'm a disciplined member of the African National Congress. And in as far as implementing the resolutions of conference resolutions are implemented on an ongoing basis. And sometimes people choose this one and that one. I tend to look at the broader picture and look at the strategic approach that we should have, as well as the tactical approach. Because when you implement a decision, you've got to do it in a balanced way. And I need to do that as a leader. And even prior leaders who have come before us have tended to do that. We look at the opportune time to implement. And let me say that we don't have a dereliction of duty as a common behavior. We always try to do the best and implement the decisions of our conference. If you look at some of our resolutions from 1991, some of those resolutions have not yet been implemented. But I'm determined that resolutions that have been taken by our conference must be respected. They must be implemented, and we need to look at the strategic approach as well as the tactical approach in as far as implementing all those resolutions. If you look at all those that you've mentioned, there are various processes that are underway to even set up a state bank, to the question of land, which I addressed quite extensively yesterday. All those processes are underway, including the issue of the central bank. All those matters are being addressed, and they will be addressed to complete satisfaction as far as our members are concerned.
I've got to thank you for your time, Mr. President. I'm completely out of time. By the way, whatever happened to the Tumamina walks?
Well, I still walk. I still walk, and I enjoy my walking, and I'm glad to see that a number of ANC members and leaders also get involved in physical activity. So we need to be fit, particularly for this struggle against COVID that we are going to have.
And leadership under these circumstances, how has that been for you? Under the circumstances of a pandemic, leading a nation in crisis?
Well, it's been challenging, I must say, and it's been exhausting because we are involved in many processes, many meetings. I mean, sometimes we hold meetings for 18 hours of the day with very little time left for family and for resting. But this is the calling that we have. We've got to move on and serve the interests of the people of South Africa. That, for me, is the most important thing.
Mr. President, thank you for your time. President Cyril Ramaphosa is also the president of the ANC, talking to us here about the ANC's January 8th statement and the priorities that they have set for themselves in the year 2021, as well as issues coming out of his leadership of government.